Grubel, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here on the other side. As you know, I spent 4 years as a finance critic for the Reform Party, spending many hours in this room. Secondly, I'd like to note that I am both a professor of economics emeritus at Simon Fraser University and a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute. Neither institutions have official positions on anything. I am here in my personal capacity as an economist. And I'd like to begin my presentation with a very radical proposition. The question before this hearing should be whether or not to get rid of the backlist altogether, not how to make it shorter. The question about the best immigration levels to shorten the list involves the moral, bureaucratic, political, and practical morass. As you will have noticed already, no witness has produced any objective criteria for determining the number of immigrants. The reason is simple. There are none. All recommendations of numbers are basically arbitrary and driven by hidden moral and political motives. Let me suggest that instead moral and political criteria, we should adopt the following fundamental principles. Let us set policies so that immigrants benefit Canada, not so that Canada benefits immigrants. Second, let us use our country's desire to help foreigners only after we have provided adequately for many of our compatriots who need health care, caregivers, housing, special education, and so on. If we want to contribute to the welfare of foreigners, let us continue to admit genuine refugees and send foreign aid to the needy abroad. My suggestions are based on the realization that there's almost universal agreement among economists that immigration has no significant positive effects on the incomes of Canadians. But if they come in large numbers, these large numbers depress wages and raise profits, effects which most of us don't really support. This traditional view of the merit of immigration that I have taught and written about for decades as a professor has become obsolete with the existence of the welfare state, in which everyone in Canada is entitled to a large array of social benefits, and the progressive income tax system requires recent immigrants with average low incomes to pay fewer taxes than the average Canadian. In a joint study with Patrick, we have estimated that these provisions of the welfare state are putting a fiscal burden of about $20 to $30 billion on Canadians every year. That's what we spent over the next 15 years to renew our Navy. This we spend every year because of the selection procedures we are using to admit immigrants. All traditional arguments about the merit of immigration are bogus and do not stand up to careful analysis. To mention just a few, immigrants are not needed to fill job vacancies. In fact, they can create shortages with their demands for housing, infrastructure, and doctors. 10 years' worth of immigrants require 5,500 new doctors. Where are we going to get them from? They do not solve the problem of unfunded liability of social programs and may worsen it. Their contributions to multiculturalism are marginal and at the borderline of becoming negative. Many countries without immigration are doing very well indeed economically and socially, from Korea and Singapore to China and India. For these reasons, I recommend that we should adopt policies which bring into Canada only immigrants who pay taxes high enough to have access to funds that match the cost they impose on our social programs. Before I offer some thoughts on the system for attaining this objective, let me present my radical proposal for dealing with the backlog. Simply pass a law which repeals the existing legislation promising that anyone who pays a fee is guaranteed consideration for an immigrant visa. Dissolve the existing backlog by sending each applicant a letter saying, in diplomatic language of course, the Parliament of Canada has decided that it is no longer obligated to consider your application. Attached to this letter is a refund of the fee you have paid, including interest. Parliaments pass this kind of legislation all the time. The wheat board will be dissolved. The gun registry will be scrapped. The national energy policy no longer exists. When I was in Parliament, transfers to the provinces were changed in the 1990s. I could go on, but the point is clear. No past legislation is immune from change or repeal by new parliaments. All such changes are accompanied by much opposition and debate, sometimes very heated. But this is not something to be regretted or feared. It is intrinsic to democracy. Elections are the ultimate arbiter of the public on the merit of such changes. Now to a brief discussion of an immigration policy that brings benefits to Canadians living in the welfare state. Issue immigration visas only to applicants who have a pre-approved employment contract at a pay at least equal to the average earned by Canadians and subject to passing normal health and security standards. Parents and grandparents should be given such visas only if their offspring posts a bond large enough to cover their expected cost of health care and pays for their living expenses they might need. Under these provisions, immigrants no longer impose a fiscal burden on Canadians. The principle underlying my proposal is simple and clear. Let market signals, not politicians, technocrats, and vested interests determine who should be admitted and how many immigrants should enter Canada annually. Relying on market signals in the operation of the economy has served Canadians and the rest of the world well. It should do so for the selection of immigrants. Let me conclude with some observations about the policies of immigration policy. Recent opinion surveys show clearly that most Canadians are in favor of reduced levels of immigration or the maintenance of current levels. In considering these results, it is important to note that these sentiments are strongest in the country's largest cities, where immigrants have settled in the past, but where—
1 minute, Mr. Grubel.
Yes, sir, I am on track. But where, importantly also, the largest numbers of parliamentary seats are at stake. Through my own limited contact with immigrants, I have noticed that they are very much aware, more than the average Canadian, of the cost immigrants impose on us, fiscally, through congestion and pollution, high housing costs, and other channels. For these reasons, parties that embrace policy reforms of the sort that I am proposing can expect electoral gains rather than losses in ridings in which immigrants reside in large numbers. To verify the correctness of my views, I urge politicians to make their own surveys and remain skeptical of surveys results produced by organizations that may be supported by the immigration industry and alleged to show that Canadians want more immigrants. Thank you.
You're right on the